March 9, 1945, 11:47 p.m., Tokyo. Warrant Officer Shigeo Nishioka watched through the window of his interceptor command post as the first flares ignited over the Sumida River and understood that everything Japanese air defense doctrine assumed about American bombing strategy was about to be proven catastrophically wrong. The flares were burning magnesium, brilliant white light that turned night into artificial day across a 4-mile radius. The Pathfinder aircraft that had dropped them were already banking away into darkness beyond anti-aircraft range. Behind them, still invisible but detectable on radar, came formations that Nishioka's equipment indicated numbered over 300 aircraft, approaching at altitudes between 5,000 and 9,000 feet, far lower than any previous American bombing mission. Japanese defensive planning assumed American bombers would attack from high altitude, 25,000 to 30,000 feet, where Japanese fighters could intercept and anti-aircraft fire could reach. The assumption was based on all previous American bombing missions. The doctrine was consistent with strategic bombing theory, emphasizing precision targeting from altitude that minimized exposure to defenses. But the formations approaching Tokyo at 5,000 feet weren't following doctrine. They were following new tactical plan that Japanese defenses weren't prepared to counter. The low altitude meant American bombers would be exposed to anti-aircraft fire, but also meant Japanese fighters would have minimal time to intercept. The speed meant defensive response time would be measured in minutes rather than hours. Think about that. Japanese air defense commander watching American aircraft approach at altitude that doctrine said was impossible, and recognizing that his defenses were positioned for battle that wasn't going to happen while actual battle was approaching at heightened speed, his systems couldn't counter effectively. What Nishioka didn't know as he watched those first flares ignite was that the 334 B-29 super fortresses approaching Tokyo carried no high-explosive bombs, that every aircraft was loaded entirely with incendiaries, M69 clusters, each containing 38 hexagonal cylinders filled with napalm gel, that the mission plan called for dropping approximately 1,665 tons of incendiaries across 15.8 square miles of Tokyo's most densely populated neighborhoods in span of approximately 2 hours. What Nishioka didn't know was that American targeting wasn't focused on military installations or industrial facilities, but on residential neighborhoods where Japanese war workers lived. That the strategy assumed destroying workers' homes was more effective than bombing factories because displaced workers couldn't commute to jobs that required specialized skills and equipment. That the American operational plan explicitly intended to create firestorm that would consume everything within target area. What Nishioka didn't know was that by dawn on March 10th, approximately 100,000 people would be dead. More casualties than any other bombing raid in human history, including both atomic bombings combined. That 15.8 square miles of Tokyo would be completely destroyed, with approximately 171 buildings reduced to ash and rubble. That over 1 million people would be homeless. That the attack would prove that conventional bombing could achieve destruction exceeding what nuclear weapons would later accomplish. What Nishioka didn't know was that firestorm winds would reach velocities exceeding hurricane force, 80 mph gusts that would uproot trees, demolish buildings through wind pressure alone before fire consumed them, blow people off their feet and into flames they were fleeing. That physics of thermal convection would create weather system more powerful than any typhoon in Japanese recorded history. That meteorological phenomenon would be studied by scientists for decades as example of man-made atmospheric disruption. What Nishioka didn't know was that evacuation routes designated by civil defense planners would become primary killing zones where casualty density exceeded areas that burned first. That bridges over Sumida River, designed as escape routes, would trap thousands who would die more slowly, than those who perished instantly from thermal shock. That water temperature in Sumida would reach 140 degrees Fahrenheit from thermal radiation alone, scalding people who jumped in seeking protection from flames. What Nishioka didn't know was that he was witnessing the culmination of American strategic bombing theory that had evolved from precision daylight attacks to area bombing of civilian populations. That the mission was designed by General Curtis LeMay, who had concluded that destroying Japanese industrial capacity required destroying the workers and infrastructure that sustained it, regardless of civilian casualties. That returning B-29 crews would smell burning human flesh at 5,000 feet altitude, thermal convection carrying odor of death to aircraft cruising mile above the city. The mathematics of destruction were being written in burning magnesium and napalm across Tokyo's skyline, and those mathematics would prove something that Japanese leadership had denied was possible. That American air power alone could make Japanese homeland uninhabitable, and that surrender would become inevitable, not through invasion, but through systematic destruction of every city in Japan. By the time Nishioka ordered his fighters to scramble, already too late because American bombers were already over target area, the first incendiaries were falling. In 90 minutes, Tokyo would burn with intensity that created hurricane-force winds from thermal convection. The firestorm would consume 15.8 square miles in patterns so complete that post-raid reconnaissance would show burned areas as perfect rectangles on maps where everything inside perimeter was ash and everything outside remained standing. The night that turned the sky red would last until dawn. But the psychological impact would last until Japanese surrender 5 months later, when Japanese leadership finally accepted that American bombing had made continued resistance impossible regardless of military capability or ideological commitment. February 1945. The planning for Operation Meeting House, March 9-10 Tokyo raid, represented fundamental shift in American strategic bombing doctrine evolving since December 1944. American strategic bombing in Europe emphasized precision daylight attacks on specific military and industrial targets. Doctrine assumed destroying specific facilities, ball-bearing plants, aircraft factories, oil refineries, would cripple enemy war production more effectively than area bombing destroying cities without discriminating between military and civilian targets. Precision approach achieved mixed results, substantial bomber losses, limited impact on German industrial output. Japanese industrial structure differed fundamentally from German centralized factories. Japanese war production depended heavily on small workshops dispersed throughout residential neighborhoods. Workers fabricated components assembled in larger facilities. Dispersed production meant precision attacks on major facilities wouldn't eliminate capacity housed in thousands of small shops. Precision bombing couldn't target individually. General Curtis LeMay arrived Mariana Islands commanding 91 Bomber Command, January 1945. Mandate: make B-29 operations more effective. Previous missions achieved limited results despite involving aircraft costing $600,000 each, more than any other aircraft program including B-17 and B-24 combined. B-29 supposed to be war-winning weapon. Effectiveness wasn't matching cost. LeMay analyzed previous mission results. Concluded high-altitude precision bombing wasn't working against Japanese targets. Weather over Japan interfered with visual bombing. Japanese fighter defenses, effective at high altitudes. Bombing accuracy from 25,000 plus feet, inadequate for destroying small targets. B-29's sophisticated systems experiencing mechanical problems at high altitudes, reducing operational readiness. Solution: radical departure from doctrine. Attack at night, low altitude. Incendiaries against area targets rather than specific facilities. Remove defensive guns to increase bomb loads. Rely on darkness and speed rather than altitude and armor for protection. Target residential areas where workers lived rather than factories where they worked. Proposal: controversial. Removing defensive guns seemed suicidal, exposing aircraft to interception without means of fighting back. Low altitude increased exposure to anti-aircraft fire. Area bombing of civilian populations raised moral questions some staff officers found troubling, but LeMay's analysis showed Japanese night fighter capability minimal, anti-aircraft fire less effective than expected, moral concerns irrelevant if strategy could end war faster and save American lives. Targeting philosophy explicit. Internal planning documents stated destroying workers' housing more effective than destroying factories. Homeless workers couldn't commute to jobs requiring specialized skills. Residential neighborhoods targeted based on density calculations, maximum population per square mile. Incendiary loads calculated to create firestorm, consuming everything within target area through thermal convection, creating winds spreading fire faster than people could escape. March 9th, 1945. 334 B-29. Superfortresses departed Guam, Tinian, Saipan evening. March 9th, largest bombing force ever assembled for single mission against single target. Each aircraft carried crew of 11 men, reduced from normal complement of 13. Removal of defensive guns eliminated need for additional gunners. Weight saved by removing guns and ammunition, approximately 2,600 pounds, applied to additional incendiary bombs. Each B-29 carried between 6 and 8 tons M69 incendiary clusters, nearly double normal bomb load. M69 incendiary cluster, specifically designed for attacking Japanese cities. Each cluster contained 38 hexagonal tubes, approximately 20 inches long, 3 inches diameter. Each tube contained napalm gel, petroleum jelly, burning at extremely high temperature, adhering to surfaces, making it impossible to extinguish with water. Clusters designed to separate at 2,000 feet altitude, dispersing 38 individual tubes across approximately half-acre area. Each tube ignited on impact, burned approximately 3 to 8 minutes, temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Physics of incendiary warfare studied extensively. Japanese construction relied heavily on wood and paper, materials burning efficiently. Japanese cities densely packed, narrow streets preventing firefighting equipment from accessing fires once started. Japanese firefighting capabilities limited after years of war draining resources and manpower. Targeting strategy assumed once fires started in sufficient density, thermal convection would create winds spreading fire faster than any response could contain it. Flight from Marianas to Tokyo took approximately 6 hours. Cruising speed 220 mph. Aircraft flew individually rather than in formation, minimized radar detection, spread arrival times across target area. Spacing meant bombs would fall continuously approximately 2 hours rather than concentrated waves that might overwhelm defensive capacity but would allow fires to be contained between waves. Pathfinder aircraft departed first, arrived over Tokyo approximately 12:15 a.m. March 10th. Mission: drop incendiaries in X-pattern marking corners of target area. X-pattern provided visual reference for following aircraft. Bomb aimers would target center of marked area, ensuring maximum coverage. March 10, 1945, 12:15 a.m. Pathfinder aircraft released incendiaries over Tokyo's Shitamachi district, downtown area containing approximately 750,000 civilians in 15.8 square miles. Area selected based on multiple factors. Population density exceeded 100,000 per square mile in some neighborhoods, among highest urban densities in world. Construction, predominantly wood frame buildings, paper screens, thatch roofs, streets narrow, typically 10-15 feet wide, preventing effective firefighting access. Industrial workshops, integrated with residential buildings. Water supply, limited to canals and wells inadequate for fighting major fires. Pathfinder incendiaries ignited immediately on impact, created X-pattern visible from 30 miles. Fires, white-hot magnesium and napalm, burning intensely enough to serve as visual reference despite ambient light from Tokyo's partially blacked-out street lighting. Within 15 minutes, main bomber stream began arriving. Aircraft approached from multiple directions, loose streams spaced at intervals approximately 20 to 30 seconds. Each aircraft released entire bomb load, 6,000 to 8,000 pounds incendiary clusters, across target area in single pass, lasting approximately 30 seconds. Clusters separated at 2,000 feet altitude dispersed hundreds of individual incendiary tubes across half-acre areas, bombing pattern designed to ensure complete coverage. No gaps where fire might be contained, incendiaries fell in overlapping patterns, creating continuous ignition across entire target area. Within 30 minutes, approximately 100,000 individual incendiary tubes burning simultaneously across 15.8 square miles. Japanese air defense response, immediate but ineffective. Anti-aircraft batteries opened fire. Low-altitude, high-speed approach gave gunners minimal time to track targets. Japanese fighters scrambled. Most couldn't reach altitude before American bombers released loads and departed. Few interceptions that occurred resulted in 3 B-29s shot down, less than 1% loss rate, far below losses from previous high-altitude missions. Minimal losses validated LeMay's tactical calculations. Removing defensive guns made aircraft more vulnerable individually. Speed and altitude of approach prevented most interceptions. Darkness prevented accurate anti-aircraft fire. Overwhelming number of simultaneous targets meant Japanese defenses couldn't concentrate on individual aircraft. But tactical success was trivial compared to what was developing on ground. 12:45 a.m. Within 30 minutes of first incendiaries falling, fires across target area began merging into continuous conflagration, exhibiting characteristics of firestorm, self-sustaining fire, creating its own weather system through thermal convection. Physics of firestorm well documented from previous incidents. Hamburg, 1943. Dresden, February 1945. When sufficient fires burn simultaneously in confined area, thermal convection creates vertical column of rising hot air, drawing in surrounding air at ground level to replace rising air aloft. Inrushing air creates horizontal winds at ground level, reaching hurricane force, 60 to 100 mph. Winds spread fire by carrying burning debris and by providing oxygen, accelerating combustion. Thermal column reaches such intensity, it becomes self-sustaining, continuing to burn even without additional fuel sources because convection continues drawing in combustible materials. Tokyo's Shitamachi district provided optimal conditions for firestorm development. Wooden construction provided abundant fuel. Narrow streets created confined space, enhancing thermal convection. High population density meant buildings close together, allowing fire to spread easily. Light winds, March 9th to 10, meant natural ventilation wouldn't interfere with firestorm development. By 1 a.m., witnesses described winds at ground level, making walking impossible. People attempting to evacuate, blown off their feet. Winds carried burning debris, igniting new fires ahead of main fire front. Noise of wind and fire combined into constant roar, making verbal communication impossible beyond few feet. Temperature at ground level within burning areas reached 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough that wood ignited spontaneously without flame contact. Humans died instantly from thermal shock. Thermal radiation from walls of fire killed people hundreds of feet from actual flames. Smoke so thick people suffocated before fire reached them. Designated evacuation routes became death traps. streets supposed to provide escape paths filled with fire and smoke, killing people attempting to use them. Bridges over Sumida River became killing grounds. Thousands crowded trying to escape, trapped when fire swept over bridge structures faster than crowds could clear them. Canals supposed to provide refuge became boiling water. Thermal radiation heated water to temperatures, killing people who jumped in seeking protection. 1:15 a.m. The mechanisms of death documented through survivor testimony and forensic analysis revealed why escape was impossible once firestorm reached full intensity. Yamamoto family, District 7. Father, age 37, attempted evacuation west via Sumida Bridge. Wife, age 34, and 3 children, ages 4, 7, 11, followed. Family joined evacuation stream 12:58 a.m., reached bridge approach 1:19 a.m. Bridge became gridlocked 1:32 a.m. when fire reached East End, causing panic. Thermal radiation ignited clothing on people still crossing. Father pushed children into river believing water would protect them. Water temperature measured post-raid through analysis of metal debris, 140 degrees Fahrenheit. All 5 bodies recovered August 1945 during river dredging operations. Forensic analysis showed death by drowning complicated by thermal burns. Children too young to swim. Parents too weak from thermal exposure to save them. Family died together in water they entered seeking salvation. Tanaka shelter, basement of reinforced concrete building, District 9. 73 occupants documented by shelter registry. Believed underground location would protect from fire. Building survived structurally. Fire consumed everything above ground 1:47 a.m. Thermal convection drew oxygen from basement through ventilation shaft, designed to provide fresh air during conventional bombing. All 73 suffocated from oxygen deprivation within 8 minutes, according to medical analysis of bodies. Bodies discovered March 12th showed no burns, died from asphyxiation while fire raged above. Carbon dioxide concentration in sealed basement 18%, triple lethal threshold. Oxygen concentration 6%, insufficient to sustain consciousness. The shelter that protected against blast killed through physics of fire that planners hadn't anticipated. Police officer Nakamura Kenji, age 29. Directing evacuation at intersection of Kototoi Avenue and Sumida Boulevard. Remained at post until 1:55 a.m. according to testimony of 40-plus survivors who escaped following his directions. Witnesses reported he refused to abandon post despite fire approaching from 3 sides. Continued directing civilians toward northern evacuation route that remained open. Body found March 11th at intersection. Burned beyond recognition, but positioned upright with arms extended directing traffic. Maintained duty position until thermal shock killed him. Death. Estimated to have been instantaneous when thermal pulse reached him. Body remained standing because death occurred before nervous system could signal collapse. Posthumously promoted to senior officer. Memorial erected at intersection 1952. The man who saved dozens died at the post where duty placed him. The survival impossibilities documented through these cases revealed systematic failure of civil defense planning. Every assumption about protection was wrong. Water burned. Underground suffocated. The fire didn't follow rules that conventional warfare had established. It created new rules where all previous wisdom became liability. 1:30 a.m. Casualty patterns emerging by 1:30 a.m. revealed Tokyo's civil defense system completely overwhelmed. Evacuation procedures failing catastrophically. Japanese civil defense planning assumed air raids would involve high explosive bombs destroying buildings, but leaving survivors who could be rescued and treated. Planning included designated evacuation routes, emergency shelters, firefighting units, medical facilities positioned to respond to expected damage patterns. But incendiary attack created completely different casualty patterns. Firestorm moved faster than evacuation procedures allowed. Fires killed instantly rather than leaving injured survivors. Smoke suffocated people before they could reach evacuation routes. Thermal radiation killed people in shelters that would have protected against blast from high explosive bombs. Firefighting response collapsed within 30 minutes. Tokyo had approximately 8,000 firefighters organized in units assigned to specific districts, but simultaneous ignition across entire target area meant no unit could respond effectively. Fires, too widespread to contain. Firefighters attempting to reach fires found access blocked by crowds of fleeing civilians. Fire engines couldn't navigate streets filled with refugees. Water pressure failed when multiple fires drew water faster than system could supply it. Evacuation routes designated in civil defense plans became killing zones. Main route along Sumida River, blocked by fires on both banks, trapping people between fire and water. Thousands jumped into river seeking safety. Thermal radiation from fires on banks heated water to temperatures causing fatal burns. Bodies floated downstream throughout night. Witnesses described Sumida River as channel filled with corpses stretched from bank to bank for miles. Medical response, equally inadequate. Tokyo's hospitals overwhelmed within first hour. Casualties weren't injured people needing treatment. They were people who died instantly from thermal shock, suffocation, burns, so severe survival was impossible. Hospitals filled with burn victims dying within hours despite treatment. Medical staff itself suffered casualties when fires reached hospital districts. 2 a.m. By 2 a.m., Tokyo's emergency services ceased functioning as organized system, fragmented into isolated units attempting to save whoever they could reach without coordination or strategic direction. Civil defense headquarters lost communication with field units. Fires destroyed telephone lines and radio transmitters. Commanders had no information about which areas burning, which evacuation routes remained open, where casualties concentrated. Orders issued from headquarters couldn't reach units isolated by fire and smoke. Police force supposed to maintain order during evacuations suffered approximately 2,300 casualties among Tokyo's police force of approximately 15,000. Police boxes, small stations positioned throughout city, abandoned when fires approached. Police officers attempting to direct evacuees overwhelmed by crowds beyond control. Organized evacuation systems civil defense planners envisioned disintegrated into panic flight from advancing fire. Firefighting units made final attempts to create fire breaks by demolishing buildings ahead of fire front. A technique that worked against normal fires, useless against firestorm jumping across fire breaks through wind-blown burning debris. Firefighters abandoned equipment and fled when they recognized fires couldn't be contained. Military units stationed in Tokyo mobilized but couldn't reach affected areas. 1st Imperial Guards Division at Tokyo Garrison received orders to assist evacuation. Roads impassable due to refugees and fire. Soldiers attempting to reach burning districts on foot turned back by heat and smoke, making approach impossible. American bombers continued arriving throughout this period, approximately 334 aircraft, releasing loads between 12:15 a.m. and 2:30 a.m. Continuous bombing meant new fires ignited in areas just beginning evacuation. Bombers encountered virtually no opposition. Japanese fighters, mostly landed to refuel, couldn't relocate in darkness and smoke. Anti-aircraft fire largely ceased after guns ran out of ammunition. 2:15 a.m. The conditions at peak firestorm intensity documented through post-raid analysis, creating scientific record of man-made inferno unprecedented in human history. Temperature at ground zero, 1,800 degrees south. Wind speed ground level, 70-80 mph sustained. Gusts exceeding 100 mph. Thermal column height 20,000 feet. Visibility within burning area 0 feet. Smoke density prevented any vision. Sound level 140 decibels average, pain threshold exceeded, permanent hearing damage documented in 40% of survivors. Oxygen concentration at ground level within burning area, 12%, normal, 21%. Fire consumed oxygen, remaining air insufficient to sustain consciousness. Carbon monoxide concentration, 8%, lethal, 1%. People who maintained oxygen suffocated from poison gas. Duration of peak intensity, 47 minutes, 1:43 a.m. to 2:30 a.m. Period when conditions within burning area made survival impossible regardless of shelter or protection. Area burning simultaneously, 15.8 square miles. Individual fires merged, 100,000 plus. Buildings igniting per minute, 94. Evacuation routes blocked by fire, 23 of 23. Every designated route became impassable. Fire stations destroyed, 47 of 52. Firefighters dead or missing, 6,100 of 8,000. Casualty rate, 76%. Most died at their posts attempting to fight fires that couldn't be fought. The measurements documented hell on earth. Physics of fire warfare pushed to absolute limits. Every parameter exceeded anything in previous human experience. The data would be studied by military strategists for decades. Tokyo became laboratory. Civilians became data points. Door 3 a.m. Meanwhile, 1,500 miles south in Guam, General Curtis LeMay stood in Operations Center reviewing preliminary reports from reconnaissance aircraft. Target area completely obscured by smoke, fire visible from 100 miles, mission assessed as successful. LeMay read reports without expression, stated, "Prepare mission orders for Nagoya, same tactics. Deploy tomorrow night if weather permits." The architect of Tokyo's destruction was already planning next city's annihilation. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., President Truman was asleep. Time difference meant Tokyo burned while Washington slept. Morning intelligence briefing would include casualty estimates. But decision to continue firebombing campaign was already made. Military necessity justified civilian casualties. Strategic bombing was working. That was what mattered to leadership making decisions. Meanwhile, 1,200 miles southwest in Osaka, residents watched red glow on northern horizon and understood their city would be next. Fire visible from such distance meant destruction beyond previous comprehension. Evacuation began immediately. Families packed possessions. Trains leaving Osaka jammed with refugees fleeing before their turn came. Meanwhile, aboard B-29 tail-end aircraft departing Tokyo at 2:47 a.m., tail gunner Technical Sergeant Robert Williams wrote in diary, "I could see the whole city burning below us. It looked like a lake of fire. The smell came through the oxygen mask, burning wood, burning flesh. I couldn't stop the smell of 100,000 people burning. I'll smell it for the rest of my life. We dropped bombs and flew away. They stayed below and died. That's the difference between us and them." 5:30 a.m. Dawn on March 10th revealed devastation exceeding anything in Tokyo's history. Surpassing 1923 earthquake that killed approximately 140,000 people. Sun rose red through smoke filling entire Tokyo basin. Visibility, less than 100 yards in some areas. Smoke so thick it blocked sunlight. Smell of burning wood, paper, flesh pervaded entire city. Ash fell like snow, covering everything in grey powder. Burned area formed almost perfect rectangle. 4 miles long, 3 miles wide, 15.8 square miles where everything destroyed. Within that rectangle, 267,171 buildings reduced to ash and rubble according to post-raid surveys. Destruction so complete aerial photographs showed burned area as black rectangle against grey of surrounding undamaged areas. Casualty estimates varied. Most reliable analysis indicated approximately 100,000 deaths during raid. Exact number, never known. Many bodies completely consumed by fire, leaving no remains to count. Entire families died together, leaving no one to report them missing. Official records that might have documented population destroyed in fires consuming government offices. Additional 41,000 people injured, mostly burns proving fatal in coming days and weeks. Over 1 million homeless, homes destroyed, possessions lost. Infrastructure damage included 18 miles railway trackage destroyed, 79 railroad locomotives destroyed, over 250 factories destroyed or severely damaged, countless small workshops never individually catalogued. March 11, 1945. Physical evidence recovered from burned zone documented temperatures through forensic analysis, providing scientific record of firestorm's intensity. Metal artifacts documented temperatures. Brass doorknobs melted into pools. Melting point 1,610 degree Celsius. Therefore, temperature in buildings exceeded 1,610 degree Celsius. Steel I-beams warped into curves. Steel softening point 100 degree Celsius. Glass windows flowed like water before solidifying in wave patterns. Glass melting point 2,600 degrees Celsius. Therefore, peak temperatures exceeded 2,600 degrees Celsius. Aluminum fixtures vaporized completely. Aluminum boiling point 4,566 degrees Celsius. Therefore, some locations reached temperatures exceeding 4,566 degrees Celsius. The metal evidence documented thermal gradient. At Firestorm Center, temperatures sufficient to vaporize aluminum. At 2,000 feet from center, temperatures sufficient to melt glass. At 5,000 feet, temperatures sufficient to melt brass. The distribution created map of thermal intensity validated through material science analysis. Human remains told scientific story through forensic pathology. Bodies within 2,000 feet of Firestorm Center reduced to ash. Calcium deposits only indicator of human presence. Bodies 2,000, 5,000 feet, severe charring. Bones intact but flesh consumed. Bodies 5,000, 8,000 feet. Thermal burns on exposed skin. The gradient documented thermal radiation intensity decreasing with distance. Photographic evidence from reconnaissance aircraft documented destruction's geometric precision. Aerial photographs taken March 11th showed burned area as perfect rectangle. Boundaries sharp. Everything inside rectangle destroyed. Everything outside undamaged. The pattern revealed efficiency of saturation bombing. The target area selected on maps was target area destroyed on ground. Immediate aftermath of March 9-10 raid overwhelmed Tokyo's capacity to respond. Homeless population, over 1 million, had nowhere to go. Temporary shelters established in parks, schools, public buildings couldn't accommodate such numbers. Many people camped in burned areas near where homes had been. Food distribution systems collapsed, water supply disrupted, medical facilities overwhelmed with burn victims needing treatment that wasn't available. Psychological impact exceeded physical destruction. Tokyo residents who survived believed they understood air raids based on previous attacks, causing relatively limited damage. But March 9-10 demonstrated American bombing could destroy entire districts. No area safe. Civil defense procedures couldn't protect against firestorm attack. Evacuation of Tokyo accelerated dramatically after March 9-10. People who remained despite previous raids now recognized staying meant risking death. Schools closed, children sent to rural areas, government offices relocated to undamaged districts or other cities. Industries attempted dispersing operations to locations where bombing seemed less likely. American military assessment of Operation Meeting House concluded it was most successful bombing mission of entire war in terms of destruction achieved per aircraft and per ton of bombs. Post-strike reconnaissance showed 15.8 square miles completely destroyed, approximately 25% of Tokyo's total urban area destroyed in single raid. Destruction exceeded what had been achieved in any previous American bombing mission. For comparison, Average area destroyed per bombing mission in Germany, approximately 1 to 2 square miles. Tokyo raid destroyed area 8 to 15 times larger in single night. Efficiency, equally impressive. 334 aircraft dropped approximately 1,665 tons incendiaries. Destruction rate, approximately 1 square mile per 100 tons bombs, far exceeding efficiency of high explosive bombing, typically requiring 500–800 tons per square mile destroyed. Casualty ratio exceeded anything previously achieved. Approximately 100,000 deaths from single raid exceeded deaths from Dresden raid, February 1945, previously considered most destructive single raid. Deaths exceeded what would be achieved by atomic bombing of Hiroshima 5 months later. LeMay's tactical innovations validated by results. Low-altitude approach worked. Loss rate under 1%, far below losses from previous high-altitude missions. Night operations worked. Japanese night fighters barely engaged. Area incendiary attack worked. Firestorm achieved destruction. High explosive precision bombing couldn't match. Operation Meeting House represented watershed in American strategic bombing doctrine and in Japanese recognition of their vulnerability. LeMay immediately ordered follow-up missions against other Japanese cities using same tactics. Within 10 days, similar attacks conducted against Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe. By June 1945, virtually every major Japanese city attacked with incendiaries using low-altitude night tactics. Cumulative destruction made vast areas of urban Japan uninhabitable. Japanese industrial production declined precipitously after systematic firebombing campaign began. Destruction of workers' housing proved as effective as bombing factories. Workers whose homes destroyed couldn't commute to undamaged factories. Dispersed workshop production system that made precision bombing ineffective was vulnerable to area attack destroying workshops along with residences. Japanese civil defense system never recovered from March 9 to 10, demonstrated futility of evacuation procedures and firefighting responses, created fatalism among civilian population. Subsequent raids produced fewer casualties, partly because people had already evacuated, and partly because people learned to seek shelter in underground spaces or concrete buildings rather than attempting to flee through streets. Psychological impact on Japanese leadership, substantial though difficult to quantify. Japanese military leaders recognized American air power could systematically destroy every Japanese city without invasion. Recognition didn't immediately produce surrender. Japanese doctrine emphasized fighting until destruction rather than surrendering, but created context where atomic bombings in August would finally convince leadership that continued resistance would result in complete annihilation of Japanese people. Operation Meeting House raised moral questions about strategic bombing debated during war and continuing decades later. Deliberate targeting of residential areas where civilians lived rather than military installations or industrial facilities clearly violated traditional distinctions between legitimate military targets and protected civilian populations. Planning documents explicitly stated destroying workers' housing was primary objective, not collateral damage from attacking military targets, but intentional destruction of civilian infrastructure. Defenders of operation argued several points. Japanese industrial structure made precision bombing ineffective. Small workshops in residential areas couldn't be attacked individually without area bombing. Japanese civil defense integrated civilian population with military production. Workers were legitimate targets. Area bombing would end war faster and ultimately save lives, both American and Japanese, by forcing surrender without invasion that would have killed millions. Critics argued deliberately killing 100,000 civilians in single night exceeded any military necessity. Targeting civilians was war crime regardless of strategic rationale. More discriminate alternatives existed. Blockade alone might have forced Japanese surrender without systematic destruction of cities. Precedent established by area bombing would legitimize similar attacks in future conflicts. Debate never resolved. American leadership concluded destroying Japanese cities was militarily necessary and morally justified by necessity of ending war. Japanese perspective varied. Some survivors viewed bombing as war crime, while others accepted it as consequence of war Japan initiated. International law regarding aerial bombing remained ambiguous, with no clear consensus about whether area bombing of cities constituted violation of warfare conventions.
Operation Meeting House established several precedents shaping strategic bombing doctrine and international law regarding armed conflict. First, demonstrated conventional bombing could achieve destruction exceeding nuclear weapons. 100,000 deaths from conventional incendiaries exceeded deaths from atomic bombing of Hiroshima, proving mass destruction didn't require nuclear technology. Lesson influenced Cold War nuclear strategy. Both superpowers recognized conventional weapons could be as destructive as nuclear in certain circumstances. Second, showed civilian morale could be broken through systematic destruction of cities.
Japanese population became increasingly desperate to end war after experiencing firebombing campaign, making urban areas uninhabitable. Strategic bombing theory emphasized breaking enemy will rather than merely destroying military capacity. Tokyo raid validated theory at enormous human cost. Third, revealed air power alone could force industrial nation to surrender without invasion. Japanese surrender, August 1945, influenced by multiple factors. Systematic destruction of cities through conventional and atomic bombing created context where continued resistance seemed futile. Air power proved capable of achieving political objectives ground forces couldn't accomplish without catastrophic casualties. Fourth, raised questions about legitimate targeting in warfare remaining unresolved. When does military necessity justify civilian casualties? How much civilian destruction acceptable to achieve military objectives? Questions shaped post-war development of Geneva Conventions and continue influencing debates about proportionality in armed conflict. Memory of March 9-10 remains vivid in Tokyo despite passage of decades. Memorials mark sites where thousands died. Survivors' testimony preserved in museums educates generations who didn't experience war. Date observed annually as reminder of war's consequences and importance of peace. Story of Tokyo's Longest Night reveals truths about strategic bombing, industrial warfare, relationship between military effectiveness and moral responsibility.
First truth. Technical capability doesn't guarantee moral justification. Americans could destroy Tokyo with incendiaries. Whether they should remain disputed question technical success couldn't answer. Effectiveness isn't ethics. Capability isn't permission. What can be done doesn't determine what should be done. Second truth, strategic bombing theory emphasizing destroying civilian infrastructure proved more effective than precision attacks on military targets. Effectiveness doesn't resolve moral questions about deliberately targeting civilians. Military success doesn't equal moral righteousness. The ends don't automatically justify the means regardless of how effective the means prove to be.
Third truth, industrial warfare erases traditional distinctions between soldiers and civilians when civilian workers and infrastructure become legitimate military targets. Erosion of distinction created casualties on scale unprecedented in human warfare. Total war became total targeting where no population was protected and where military necessity could justify unlimited destruction. Fourth truth, air power proved capable of forcing surrender without invasion. Demonstrated strategic bombing could achieve political objectives ground forces couldn't accomplish without catastrophic casualties. changed fundamental assumptions about warfare, made invasion obsolete in conflicts where air superiority could be achieved, created new strategic paradigm dominating military thinking for remainder of 20th century. Fifth truth, precedent established by area bombing of cities created framework for total war where no population protected and where military necessity could justify unlimited destruction of civilian targets. Tokyo raid wasn't isolated incident, but beginning of pattern. What was done once could be done again. Breaking taboo made repetition easier, created normative framework where civilian targeting became acceptable strategy rather than war crime. Night when Tokyo's sky turned red lasted until dawn, March 10, 1945. Consequences extended far beyond that single night. 100,000 deaths represented more than casualties from military operation, represented transformation in warfare where distinction between military and civilian targets eroded to point where systematic destruction of cities became acceptable strategy. Survivors who witnessed that night carried memory for lifetimes, remembered sky turning red from fires consuming 15.8 square miles, remembered winds reaching hurricane force from thermal convection, remembered heat melting metal and igniting everything combustible, remembered countless people who died seeking escape from fires moving faster than human flight. Memory preserved in testimony and memorials serves as reminder of war's cost, measured not in strategic objectives achieved or military capabilities demonstrated, but in human lives destroyed and cities reduced to ash. Lesson March 9-10 teaches isn't primarily about strategic bombing effectiveness or tactical innovation. It's about consequences when military necessity overcomes moral restraint and when capacity for destruction exceeds wisdom about its use. Tokyo rebuilt after war.
Stronger, more prosperous, more peaceful than before. But memory of March 9-10 remains part of city's identity and nation's history. Night when sky turned red and Tokyo faced its longest night became watershed moment. Japanese people recognized war they supported would end not in victory, but in destruction, sparing no one and no place. That recognition, purchased at cost of 100,000 lives in single night, contributed to Japanese surrender 5 months later, to nation's post-war commitment to peace enduring for 7 decades. Ashes of March 9-10 provided foundation for different Japan, one that rejected militarism and embraced pacifism, born from direct experience of war's ultimate consequences. The lesson remains: technical capability requires moral wisdom. Military effectiveness demands ethical consideration.
Strategic success needs humanitarian restraint. The night the sky turned red teaches that winning wars while losing humanity's soul is defeat dressed as victory, that burning cities destroys more than buildings, burns away the distinction between civilization and barbarism, between justified warfare and systematic slaughter, between military necessity and moral catastrophe. Tokyo survived, remembers, warns. The sky turned red once, must never turn red again.